Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 10th. Oh, I thought it was the 11th for some reason. Okay, well, it's not. It's October 10th, 2022, and I don't know what to tell you. I'm trying to think of, why would I think it was the 11th? I don't know. I guess I was probably preparing for the show late at night into the early hours, the wee hours, the weeest, I guess, of all the hours last night, although, well, I guess the weeest of them. Well, was that 1 o'clock? I don't know. I probably was working at 1 o'clock anyway, but midnight, after midnight, this would have been effective. And I probably looked up at the clock and saw that it was the 10th and didn't realize it was after midnight and started thinking that today would be the 11th. Natural reaction, except for the part about being awake so late. And I do that all the time anyway. So that doesn't really explain it, but okay. Anyway, interesting morning. It is, of course, the schools are closed today. I don't know whether you want to call it a holiday or call it something else, and I'm not really sure exactly where are we in this switch over to like, everybody saying, I'm sure, you know, the MAGA deplorables will always cling to Columbus Day. I assume not because they care very much about Columbus per se, although I'm sure they'll use that as an excuse and say, well, he discovered America. But because it would own the libs to refuse to say that it's Indigenous Peoples Day instead. But I'm not sure where we are in that transition. And I don't know. I'm not even 100% sure exactly, you know, sometimes when I read these things, whether or not Indigenous people really want non-Indigenous people calling it Indigenous Peoples Day or not. I'm not really certain where they are. I think they think they appreciate the support, but sometimes it's difficult to tell whether, you know, we're butting in or anything. But I guess we'll just call it not Columbus Day, and that'll be a good transition for now until we receive our directions immediately and directly from, I don't know who. Who would we accept as the authority on these things? Well, they'll probably get in an argument with somebody else who insists that they're the authority anyway. So I don't know. We had a good time on Friday, though it was a pre-recorded show, and spent some time unpacking the Columbus Day problem. I mean, we've done that before, but unpacking the problem of why it wasn't originally necessarily all that bad after all anyway. And maybe that at least we have this. We can do this. The motivations of those working to establish a Columbus Day weren't necessarily bad or anti-Indigenous in any, well, not in any way. I'm sure in some way there were some of them who actually were quite honestly anti-Indigenous, but it wasn't necessarily the intent of the foundation of Columbus Day. So that's a good thing. So maybe that's a good way to have people transition if they're just used to Columbus Day and want to transition to something else. By the way, if we could just start with this, anything new, I think Juneteenth and Indigenous Peoples Day, if we're going to establish that once and for all, can we, as long as we're going to get some legislation establishing them, could we get something about not having mattress sales? I don't know, almost now. Are people wanting that mattress? I just would like to see some holiday that doesn't have a mattress sale connected to it. Would be nice. The mattress people have had it far too good for far too long, don't you think? And it's time to crack down on the mattress industry somehow. All right. Well, at any rate, I saw some interesting things today. By the way, before I even begin on this, just want to let you all know, COVID, it's real. It's still out there. I didn't get it or anything. That's not the issue. Just seems like as we head into what will be probably flu season, the weather changing, et cetera, people are getting it again. People are transmitting it again. I finally did get the, what is it, bivalent? Is that how they call it? The booster with the Omicron in it. So that's good news. And that should be fully kicked in at some point soon. I was just waiting for that to, you know, A, to come out, and B, to be generally available. And then after that, it was just, well, okay, now what? I want to wait until it's, I don't know what, till I have time, go and get the thing. And I got a trip coming up that I want to be, you know, immunized for. Anyway, numbers are creeping up again. Not necessarily so much in the United States because we're just not good at reporting the numbers anymore, but in Europe. And the past couple of years, whenever the European numbers have gone up. It's taken somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks for the United States numbers to follow. So I'm a little bit concerned. And starting in Central Europe, Slovenia was having a real problem not that long ago. It's slowing down a little bit, but it did spread to Austria, which now has that problem, their neighbor. And the French are reporting increasing numbers, Germans reporting increasing numbers. So just a little bit worried about that. Keep an eye on it, and no new variants as far as I can tell, and that's good news. So we're appreciative of that. And other strange news today, I did happen across an interesting Twitter thread that has nothing to do with the news, but I'll capture it and maybe we'll talk about it one day. But it was an interesting thing. And I've given it some thought in the past. Trying to think of, let's answer the door for, I'll call it the door rather than the phone, because it's not really a phone, and bring Greg in, and we'll get underway with all this stuff. Looks like I lost the Twitter thread I was thinking of, but just an interesting thought. Just here, thought-provoking. You can go have these thoughts and have them elsewhere. But it was an interesting thing of somebody laying out the typical, let's say the typical thought process of some of our more aged society members who would say things like, our generation lived through a war, and now it could be any war that they're talking about. We're all living through wars. Well, our generation lived through a war, and we didn't have any of this mental illness stuff or PTSD or whatever the heck it is. We were just fine. It was a patriotic effort, and we didn't feel bad about it, and yada yada. But then pointing out, as this person did, well, yeah, sure, I'm sure that downing fistfuls of amphetamines with cooking sherry was just because Grandma was so happy about winning the war and so well adjusted. And people began, commenting on this, that, they had people in their families who were elderly or who did live through various war generations, and say, they suffered from alcoholism. There was a cycle of domestic abuse, and that's always been with us. And it is interesting that older generations tend not to connect the two things and think that they're unrelated, or that's just the way it was. We all drank, and that's the way you treated your wife, and that's the way it is, and it had nothing to do with the entire generation thinking that it was the way it was because they had all been through this war, and PTSD was so widespread. And it was an interesting thought. Definitely worthy of further discussion and debate, not that it should get in the way of the news today, but it did make me wonder about the tendency of the older generations today, having lived through other wars, by the way, although not nearly necessarily on the scale of World War II, but, certainly Vietnam had its impact here, Korea, all the way through our current Gulf wars and the other traumas we lived through. And now the older you are, the more likely you are to think that COVID is fake, but that rainbow fentanyl being given out for Halloween or Italian military satellites fixing our elections is real. So maybe there's still a little bit of that lingering mental illness coming through and manifesting in different ways, and we have to think about it. All right. Greg Dworkin is here. There's news. He's a doctor. He may have things to say. You never know. Let's get started. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. I don't have any COVID or flu.
Good.
I'll tell you a few things about COVID and flu, though.
I'm ready for that.
First of all, it's time for you to get your boosters and your flu shots.
Yes.
It's October, right? People worry sometimes needlessly. I
worry
about September's too early. It's not.
Okay.
And the theoretical reason for worrying about September being too early for flu shots is, what if I get it and within 4 or 5 months it wears off, and so then I get it in March or April? And the answer to that is March and April flu problems happen.
Yeah.
Flu season happens. But, October, November flu seasons happen as well. Typically it's in January, but it could be anywhere from September to May. And we never know from year to year. And it doesn't really matter, because the real thing is if you put it off, you'll put it off and you didn't get it. And then you'll get it. And that's bad.
No, that's true. Although now I do appreciate that they've made getting both vaccines a lot easier. And now, if you go to the supermarket,
get them together. Get them together.
All right.
There's no reason not to. Just do it, because it's bad enough that you missed your one shot. It's worse when you miss both or either. Just get it done. Just do it.
You can get it at the supermarket in many cases now, which is where
the pharmacy
we did. Right.
They are not doing a great job about opening stations. Yeah. The other thing is that because COVID was around, people were reasonably okay over the last couple of years about taking various and sundry precautions.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to wear a mask when you go to the doctor's office, where in the waiting room people tend to be sick.
Yes.
Just as an example, older persons such as myself continue to wear masks in supermarkets and things like that.
Yeah.
And then as things ease, you expect flu season to come back because all of those COVID precautions that people took actually helped damper and tamp down flu season over the last 2 years.
I was looking forward to that.
So now that that's gone or going, or people aren't talking about it or aren't doing it as much, even though COVID, as you point out, is still around, flu season's probably going to be back with a vengeance.
Yeah, probably. I saw when we went to get our COVID vaccines, I was sitting there waiting in my mask and everything, and I'm in the supermarket at the supermarket pharmacy in the little chairs waiting, and the people were coming up picking up prescriptions, and we're at an appropriate distance, but some people are loud talkers, and
can't help it.
So he came up to get himself.
What's this about privacy?
Right, exactly. This guy came up and said he was, I didn't remember whether he was there for Tamiflu or what. I didn't hear what he was asking for, but he then loudly announces, he's like, yeah, I got the flu. And he's not wearing a mask or anything. He's screaming, I got the flu. Can you believe it? I haven't had the flu the last couple of years, but now I've got the flu. You know what it was? I went on an airplane, and that's how I got the flu. I don't know. I can't believe it. Well, I'm not on an airplane now. Yeah, right. Yeah. So he's screaming it and coughing all over the place and waiting for his medicine, wearing no mask, telling everybody, the reason he got it was, of course, the airplane. No other way that could happen. And the rest of us sitting around waiting for our medicine because we're either sick or have chronic conditions or are waiting for vaccines. They learn nothing about it from a communicable disease that passes through droplets and is airborne and, whatever. It's all fake. So now everything's fake.
I realize that there are people in this world who like to keep the schedules, who are sticklers for things like that, who take the time to learn what's the actual optimal time for the timing on these boosters of various sorts, including COVID. And then again, there are people that get really upset with me if the pundit roundup, which generally goes up at 7:30, instead goes up at 7:35.
Yeah, right. Well, some people are like that. So okay.
Oh my gosh, it's 7:32. Where is it?
Mm-hmm.
There are people in England who train spot and are very upset when the train is like 30 seconds late.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, as you were saying before, there are older people in England who are really upset because it's not Empire anymore.
Right.
And they still haven't adjusted.
Things make people upset. Stop doing things.
The point is that all of that's okay. None of that is criminal. It's fine. It's just different than perhaps the way I would do it. And, people are complicated and they do a lot of things in a lot of different ways. Wow. So if you're one of those people who like to find out the absolute optimal time to get your vaccines, that's cool. There might be one. I can even refer you some articles. However, to me, the bigger thing is, well, did you get it at all?
I mean, I would say that's my bottom line.
Being a practical sort of person. We should go over the news. The big news story today, of course, is that after the Crimea River bridge strike by Ukraine,
yes.
Ukraine then was hit by a barrage of retaliatory hits from Russia, including military targets like children's playgrounds, high rises, and
that's where I keep the military.
Road exchanges. The thing about roads and bridges.
Road exchanges, is that like road rage?
No, it's like in Waterbury we call it the mix master. It's where you get on and get off, and it's really complicated clover leaf. And
I think of it as gunfire exchange, but okay.
Yes.
Right.
And if you're not exactly in the right lane 30 minutes before you get there, too bad for you, buddy.
Right. You're not
that kind of thing. At least in rush hour. So the thing is, there's been a whole debate about, since the Crimea River bridge is a vanity project for Putin, as well as militarily significant.
Oh, yeah.
It is a bridge to Crimea from Russia by train.
Okay, right.
Okay, so military stuff can get transported there, supplies, tanks, that sort of thing.
The train,
but it's a
riding
vanity
kind of
project
thing.
because the Soviets weren't able to pull it off, the Nazis couldn't pull it off, and Putin built it. So when Ukraine hit it, and I can't get into the debate, I don't know enough about whether it was a boat underneath it blew up or whether it was a truck bomb.
Yeah,
or,
there's a little controversy, but it blew up. That's
it probably wasn't something that you shoot from far away, because if that were the case, they would finish the job. So the thing gets set on fire. A train also gets set on fire, and that itself is going to hamper military transport on the rails. Putin gets very upset because it's his vanity project, and he decides that the best way to strike back is to hit civilian targets. But the way he describes it is the reason we're doing all of this is because to hit the bridge is terrorism, because it's got a road on it, and civilians use the road. Now, there's also it's basically two bridges in one, because there's road transport, but there's also rail transport.
All right,
the rail transport isn't
bimodal,
civilians, right? So the Geneva Conventions say that railway bridges and things like that are fair game. So Putin can say, well, you hit a road, so we're going to hit a road. Mm-hmm. And one can always argue that, well, that road might have been in some circumstances used for military transport, therefore fair game. So it's hard to argue against that, even though it may be nonsense.
Yeah.
Save you the trouble
do it
with
anyway.
your horn. And yet rails, that's like total military. So in effect, Ukraine hit a military target and Putin is hitting civilian targets, because you don't transport tanks through high rises except on the first floor. And if you do that, you got to be very careful, because the other floors may come down on you.
Right. So that's not terrorism, because they went first.
So, crazy stuff. And the thing, again, that Putin has to realize is that, and I think the world has to realize even more than Putin, is that he's losing, and that this isn't going to reverse those fortunes. Here's David Frum talking about it this morning. The sure way to avoid nuclear war is for Russia not to start one. Oh. If they don't do it, nobody else will.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't planning it, so...
Right. The sure way to end the invasion of Ukraine is for Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. And you know who else said that? It was the prime minister of...
Ukraine, he would have said it.
Norway?
Norway also, maybe. I don't know.
Finland?
Are we confusing
one
them
of
now?
those Nordic
Denmark.
countries. I suspect Finland. It's just a very straightforward way of just putting it. It's not complicated. How do we end the war? What's your plan for ending the war? How do you give Putin an off-ramp? He leaves.
Yeah, I mean...
It's up to him to figure out what his explanation is for it, because it's all nonsense anyway.
That's
so
true.
David Frum goes on to say, when you hear talk of the alleged danger of humiliating Putin, it's most often from a talker who's ouching from the humiliation of his or her past cheerleading for Putin. They hope if Western diplomacy rescues Putin from his debacle, it will also redeem them from theirs. So there's quite a bit of that going on. You have to give Putin an off-ramp. Why? Because I wrote that he'd never invade. And I feel bad about it, and I don't want you saying that I'm wrong, so I want to be right about this. Yeah, well, that's what pundits do.
Why don't we give them an off?
They just go on to something else that they could be wrong about. A successful defense of democracy, says Frum, by a coalition of fellow democracies that exposes the Western supporters of Putin, right and left, as crooked and stupid, and we have our share here. That's the outcome that the pro-Putin talkers fear. That's why they invoke nuclear war, to head that outcome off. Firing a nuclear weapon onto a Ukrainian field or into a Ukrainian city would be a horrific crime, and it won't save Putin from defeat. See, that's really the key point there. The only thing it would do is it would bring in the Western powers. And if you remember anything about the first Gulf War and Slaughter Alley and how it went for the Iraqis, the Russians have a fourth-rate army that's been degraded. So if modern Western equipment, which has been held back at this point, actually comes into Ukraine, they're screwed. So that would likely be part of the response to Russia escalating the war. Escalation is going to be on both sides and not to his benefit. So it won't save Putin from defeat. There's only one thing that can save him: his Western friends headed by Donald Trump. They're invoking nuclear war to justify themselves. Putin's Western friends are acting for the same ghastly mix of reasons as ever. For them, nothing's changed this fall. For them, nuclear is only the latest argument that frightened non-stooge voters into doing what the stooges want for their own stooge reasons.
Stoogely, as they will.
There's more than 3 of them, in other words. Meanwhile, what's actually deterring Putin from using nuclear weapons is the same thing that deterred the USSR before him: Western capability. Without nukes, he still has a path to emerge from the war alive, even keep power. If he uses them, When this war ends, and for many years thereafter, those in the West who don't value or cherish the economic and security architecture that links democracies from Estonia to New Zealand will blush when Ukrainians say, "We believe in you, why won't you believe in yourselves?" Which is a lesson for home here. But, that's the big news today. So I don't know what happens from this point onward, and certainly when. Ukraine is continuing to do okay on the battlefield. And that being the case, Russia doesn't have the capability to turn that around. That means they lose.
All right. Well, I'm hoping they get the message.
Yeah, I just hope a lot of people aren't killed between now and then.
Right.
So turning to domestic stuff, and there's a potpourri of things to cover here. We'll do elections in a moment, but Joyce Aileen points out, Joyce White Vance, Joyce Aileen on Twitter.
Okay.
What issues are on your radar screen? First up for me, the 2 appeals in progress. Trump's at SCOTUS. That's the one where he appealed the stay on Judge Cannon. Mm-hmm. And DOJ's at the 11th Circuit, where they appeal the actions of Judge Cannon.
Okay.
That will determine how much Judge Cannon can interfere with DOJ's criminal investigation into classified documents. DOJ's reply in SCOTUS is due tomorrow. Okay, so we should find out this week what's going on there. Will there be more searches? There's reporting DOJ is concerned Trump hasn't turned over all the classified material, but DOJ needs probable cause to believe evidence or fruits of a crime will be found at a specific location before it can get a search warrant. A reminder that when they did the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, they had pretty good reason to think stuff was there, and in fact stuff was there. You can't just go search stuff. So the idea that, they just pulled this because they wanted to, no. If that were the case, they'd already be searching Trump Tower in New York and Bedminster and all the other places that he squirreled stuff over.
Yes, I have seen a lot of people saying that. He has more documents. And I think intuitively we all do know it, but the problem is convincing a judge that, police agents should be able to look in particular rooms owned by Trump. You have to show something. Somebody has to say, I saw some stuff
from
there.
The inside before you can do that.
Yeah. Well, that's the real reason. Because I'm sure that they all do think that there's stuff in his, in Trump Tower, in Bedminster. Yes, probably, but
and then
that
also percolating, and this will take a while, but with the subtext of the election coming up, Joyce Vance points out there's a legal challenge by 3 Jewish women in Kentucky alleging that abortion bans interfere with their freedom of religion.
Every single Jewish woman in Kentucky is in on this.
They actually have a lawsuits in Indiana and Florida. And
yes.
Florida can bring in a lot of Jewish women. So lots of legal news as we head into the midterms. And, that's something to keep in mind as well. So election, how's the election going? Who's going to win? We don't know.
We're having one. That's right.
We're having one, and we don't know. So here are things. CBS Battleground Poll is out over the weekend with some very, very interesting things. And let me give you some example, and I sent you some of the good ones. But to set that up, because I want to do Wisconsin first.
Okay.
Let's talk about crime. And let's talk about defunding the police.
What? Who's talking about that? How dare you?
Yeah, well, it was talked about in Wisconsin. And you will recall we said at the time, not good for politics, even though it may make sense from a policy point of view, because defunding the police really means putting money towards social workers and other mental health workers to assist the police in situations where that's applicable and therefore things won't escalate rather than just buying in more tanks. That's what it sort of means. But that's not what the slogan itself says. And the slogan's going to be used by the opposition, and it is. And so here is Kevin Drum doing a very interesting write-up of a different way of looking at fear of crime. Because, of course, we don't know whether crime is up or not. Those statistics come out a couple of years later. So what's going on in 2022 won't be reported, if it's reported at all, until 2024.
Okay.
So we don't know
Right.
what
I
the
guess
crime is up
that's
or down.
true.
But we do know fear of crime
Yeah.
can be measured. There are polls that ask about this in another way. He said, let's look at what people actually do rather than what they say,
Okay.
right? Because if you're a Republican, you know the answer is yes. You're supposed to say yes. Are you
Yes.
actually scared of crime? Well, I'm scared of those people.
Yeah.
Well, who are those people? Well, Tommy Tuberville told us.
Could be anybody. Could be them. Could be Antifa.
No. It was very clear.
Oh, yes. His statement
He was
very
crystal clear. You know,
Yeah.
he broke the code.
Blah people, as Rick Santorum said.
Yeah. Well, he was even worse than that.
Yeah. Well,
They
It's
are
a
the
morning
people
show.
that want to control what you have, Tuberville said.
Yep.
They want crime because they want to take over what you've got. And just in case it's not clear to you,
Yeah.
they want to have reparations. Because they
Reparations.
think the people that do the crime are owed that bullshit that he said. That's
Yeah.
a quote.
Oh, yes. That's
I'm
true.
allowed.
It's too late now. Allowed or
Crowd
not.
roared. They're not owed that.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
So
they
pretty
roared.
clear what he's saying and, what he means. So what do people actually do rather than what they say? Well, he decided to look at Google searches
Yes.
for security equipment.
He did.
Yeah, because if you're really scared about crime, you at least look into security equipment.
Yeah, you go
and
to
I'll
Google.
tell you what he found after the break. It was pretty interesting.
Okay. Well, that kind of is interesting. What? All right. I mean, he needed a justification. That's what I do, though, when I'm afraid of crime. Oh, I might get murdered. I go on Google.
Yeah, and you find out when the sales are.
Yeah. I hope I don't get murdered
And
before
that matches
Labor Day
with,
because
some of the increases in purchases.
that may be true.
It's one of the
All
things he found.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were left with a cliffhanger, I think. We were trying to figure out why Tommy Tuberville thinks that Google data tells us something about crime, or something like that.
And reparations.
And reparations, right.
Because don't forget, Tuberville's all into reparations, as we were, David and I were chatting at the break. So when you say reparations, he's obviously referring to Civil War widows.
Yes, right.
And blah people.
Yeah, well, probably
and
them
there aren't
too.
that many Civil War widows left.
Right, and of course, this is a big problem in post-World War I Germany, having to pay all the reparations.
I'm shaking my head.
That
We
could be
traded
it.
Doug Jones for Tommy Tuberville. What were
Yes,
we thinking?
unless maybe they stuffed the ballot boxes with Chinese bamboo ballots. I didn't think about that at the time.
I think Tuberville is just telling everybody why.
No. Okay.
That's why you voted for me. You may
Right.
have thought Doug Jones was a good guy and Roy Moore was a terrible guy, but now that I'm not Roy Moore, let's be clear about why you should vote for me. And it has everything to do with those people.
Yes, although I might point out, I'd be wrong and I have no evidence. What if I pointed out that Tommy Tuberville is Roy Moore, though? How about that? What if he
Well, you have
was?
to prove it.
I
He's actually Marjorie Taylor Greene, unfortunately.
That could be true, too. And both could be true, because she's a bit of a, an odd duck herself. But okay.
And one that's bound to become more prominent, say the stories, if the Republicans take the House. So that's something to look forward to. That alone should scare you to the polls.
Yeah, really.
But speaking of being scared,
Yikes.
We're going to look at Friday
am.
Friday here, not just Black Monday and the other things,
Free.
because we're going to look at sales, or at least searches, of security equipment as a proxy for how scared are you about crime.
Huh.
So how is that going over the past few years? Google Trends data for 3 different search topics, Google Nest, security camera, and home security, says that they peak around the holiday season when people are buying stuff.
Well,
and
yeah.
there's sales.
Doesn't everything peak around holidays?
And around Google Prime days. So presumably caused by people who either buy or receive the stuff as gifts and are Googling to find out how to use it.
Yeah, I guess. Or
I just got you a Ring camera for the front door. It's easy to install. Just find a 9-year-old.
I guess that's true, too. I bought a Ring camera so that I could catch on video when somebody steals the rest of the things I Googled.
Right. Scared about crime. However, Kevin Drum says, once I smooth out the lines a bit and add trend lines, the conclusion is pretty obvious. On a national level, fear of crime is either flat or going down.
Okay.
From 2018 to 2022.
That's good news, too. Also,
no sign at all. No sign that people are increasingly interested in security equipment, and this shows up in the value of home security companies as well. Nothing very impressive. If the home security business is booming, you can't tell it from the performance of large public companies that specialize in it. So obviously this is limited applicability.
Oh, well.
But the point is Republicans love to scare you about crime the way they love to scare Virginians about caravans.
Yeah.
And so does it work? That's always been the question. Yes, the Republicans have a ton of money they dump on states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin so that they could use crime and other things to raise the negatives of the person they're running against, generally Democrat. And so they've done that with Fetterman. They've done that with Mandela Barnes in particular, which is ground zero for crime because of Black Lives Matter and buildings being set on fire, which did happen. It didn't burn down, and it's not a hellscape the way they describe New York and Chicago. They really believe
every city in America,
right? But all of those things happen. So CBS News poll comes out, and this is the Battleground Poll looking at Wisconsin and Michigan. And here's the question: defunding the police. Do you think Mandela Barnes supports defunding the police? 49% say yes.
Because he said no.
And 28% oppose defunding the police. Because you could find a clip where he used those words. And that's
I oppose saying defund the police.
Which is the exact point we tried to make at the time the thing came out and said, oh, my God, that's going to be in every commercial. Well, it's in Mandela Barnes commercials. So 49% support defunding the police, 28% oppose defunding the police. They think Barnes thinks, and 23% not sure. So if you tried to make the point that Mandela Barnes supports defunding the police, all that money has done that.
Okay.
Crime. Their policies would make you more safe from crime. Barnes 29, Johnson 42. Less safe from crime. Barnes 44, Johnson 26. Neither 27 and 32, respectively, for Barnes and Johnson. So Barnes has been tarred with the epithet that he's soft on crime.
Well, all right. That was
based on these numbers, you'd think that would be relatively successful.
All right.
But the only poll that matters is the poll that matters, right? So the vote for Senate, Wisconsin likely voters, Barnes 49, Johnson 50, in the very same poll.
Oh. No, well, that's interesting. I'd rather have more danger from crime than Ron Johnson as my senator, is the outcome of that one. That's interesting.
Well, obviously other things are going on. And one of them is vote for Senate, and people who say abortion very important, Barnes 72, Johnson 27.
Okay. I'd rather have that then.
It's a great example of the prevailing crosswinds that voters have to figure out. And Republicans will get the Republican messaging, which is crime and inflation, except in Wisconsin, it's more crime than inflation, driving people to vote the way they vote. And in Wisconsin, Democrats are going to hear the message on abortion, which Barnes is now spending his money hammering.
Okay.
Is it working? Well, it's working for both of them. So who's going to win? We don't know. That's the point.
Well, then I call me. We win.
What you can't do is say, oh, my gosh, the Republicans have dumped all this money in Wisconsin, and Barnes is getting hammered on the crime issue, and so he's in trouble. Well, yeah, but Democrats are dumping all sorts of money in Wisconsin, and Republicans are getting hammered on the abortion issue, and they're in trouble.
Yeah. How do you like that?
How do you like them apples? So, it's a tie. And so we don't know who's going to win. And the same thing is true in the governor's race, where the CBS Battleground Poll is 50-50. Now, this is based on likely voters. Nobody knows what a likely voter is this year. We've gone over that ad infinitum. And so, it may be that motivated women who come and vote, in fact, they're going to wind up winning it for Democrats, younger voters who are motivated by things like marijuana reform and the climate issues that are in the bill that Biden got passed are going to make a difference. Barnes needs to activate and motivate black voters, voters of color, and whether or not he's successful at doing that, because his image is more aligned with the progressive wing of the party than it is with the more conservative black voters who he needs to come out and support him. So what happens in the end, we don't know. We do know Wisconsin has a very good Democratic Party headed by Ben Wickler, who's rather famous.
For that purpose.
You can't name that many other people who are running parties in various states.
Right, unless they've been indicted for child molestation like the Republican guys.
And even then, only for a few days.
Right. I've forgotten their names already.
Whereas Ben Wickler's the guy that puts together Princess Bride reunions.
Yeah. Real things.
Real things.
That people like.
So that's how it's playing.
They're safe for the kids
in Wisconsin. And so, that's how it's playing everywhere. And that's why it's not really clear what's going to happen. In Georgia, Herschel Walker is like Roy Moore. And like Roy Moore, he's going to have his supporters that you can always find and give great quotes, for the media that say that, I know who he is and I don't really care. The other guy's worse and I'm voting for him. I don't care what he does or who he is. And everybody said that about Roy Moore that they could find, but he didn't get enough votes and he lost. So, what these individual quotes say as emblematic of how the party will vote are one thing. The polls say it's pretty close, but we're still waiting for post-Herschel Walker scandal polling, which is going to be out this week, I would presume. It takes a while to get in the field and do those things. And the only poll we have showed a 3-point improvement for Reverend Warnock in a race he was already slightly ahead, and we'll have to have confirmation of that. But, it's likely that, Georgia's too close and we don't know who's going to win there either. What will also happen is that partisans, particularly Republicans who are reluctant to talk to pollsters, will in the end come home. So if you push them, that is to say, you're undecided. I know you said you're undecided, but you're really not undecided. What do you really think? You'll find that they come home, and that will be misconstrued by many pundits looking for an angle for narrative as momentum. It's not. And a great example of that is Michigan, where it's really likely Gretchen Whitmer is going to win the governor election. Okay?
Yes, all right.
And the other polls that are out there from Detroit News or whatever, Epic polls, have her up by double digits. She's not going to win by double digits. She might win by 8. She might win by 7. Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania might win by more than she wins, even though she's ahead by more right now in the polls, because reluctant Republicans will, in fact, come home for Tudor Dixon, even though Dixon's a terrible candidate. And when you ask about, personal characteristics, everybody likes Whitmer and hates Dixon. But in the end, CBS Battleground Poll, Whitmer 53, Dixon 47, with 0 undecided. That's what happens when you push leaners.
They fall over.
They fall over, but you don't have any leaners. Leaners are in the 0 category. So in other words, if everybody votes the way they're leaning right now, Whitmer wins by 6 points. Again, likely voter. Maybe there's likely voters you can't figure, so maybe Whitmer wins by 8 points. She's ahead. All right? And the point is that it's not that Dixon all of a sudden has momentum. It's the same Dixon. People have the same reservations about her. It's the same Whitmer. People have the same reservations about her. This is a known race, known quantity. People aren't changing their mind. What's happening is the polls are getting tighter as the partisans start admitting that, okay, I'm not undecided anymore.
Okay.
And you're going to, look, it's the last month. You're going to see more and more of that. So don't mistake the pushing of leaners for some sort of momentum. Well, things are trending toward Republicans because in the last poll, Whitmer was ahead 53-40, and now she's ahead 53-47. All the momentum is for Dixon. No, it's the same poll.
People are approaching the final poll.
It's just that the 7% undecideds made up their mind, and they were all Republicans.
Yeah, you have the luxury of saying, I don't know, for
Whitmer's at 53.
months.
She's above 50%. She's an incumbent. Her numbers haven't changed. The polls, even in the past couple of years when they were off for Republicans, were pretty spot on for Democrats because Democrats talk to pollsters. Whitmer's going to get 53. Whitmer's going to win. That's what the polls are telling you.
Well, I hope that's right.
So
I see why.
What does all that mean? I don't know. I don't know what a 49-50 poll means or a 50-50 poll means. That's Wisconsin. But a 6-point lead at this juncture, when you push all the leaners, is a lead for the Democrat. Right. Not a guarantee.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, I came across a great example for all you football fans of how you really interpret polls.
Okay.
And it's by a political scientist from Oklahoma who's a big Oklahoma University football fan.
They have football?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are times they're good.
All right.
And there are times they're not so good.
Sooner or later, they'll
All right. So when you think about all the pundits saying, well, I know Tim Ryan is leading in the polls, but the fundamentals in Ohio favor J.D. Vance no matter how bad a candidate he is, what does that mean? Let's say you're a football fan.
All right.
Is Oklahoma a good team? Well, they've done well. Is Nebraska a bad team? Most years they're pretty good, but they just had a bunch of losses.
I see.
So if Oklahoma plays and is playing well, plays Nebraska, who's not playing well, the fundamentals say, well, Oklahoma ought to win.
I mean,
are you right about the fundamentals? Maybe, maybe not.
Right.
But what's that got to do with polling? Well, the political scientist who's the football fan writes, at this point, it's too early to tell. He wrote this in September. Polls are a snapshot. They tell us where the race is now. They're not a prediction of what will happen in the future. For example, on Saturday, Oklahoma played Nebraska in football. Think of a poll as turning on the game at a specific moment in time. You turn it on, it's the first quarter. Nebraska's up by 7. But what we know about the teams going into the game, that Oklahoma's good and Nebraska lost to a Georgia Southern team earlier this year and just fired their coach, that's the equivalent to the political fundamentals. So when you turn on the game and Nebraska's up by 7, you could say, okay, Nebraska's up, so that means they're going to win. But if I had said that, I'd be an idiot because there's plenty of time left in the game and Oklahoma's playing well and Nebraska just fired their coach and the fundamentals favor Oklahoma. And Oklahoma scored 49 unanswered points, and then they won the game 49-14.
All right.
And that's how you use polls.
I get it, sort of. I mean, I'll just take the general lesson away because I don't think I could repeat that.
Right. If the 1927 Yankees are behind by 1 run in the second inning, does that mean they lose the game?
Yes.
No.
It's going to rain. No.
Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig.
All right.
They got a better team. They're going to win. Murderers Row,
Yes.
So, just think of polls as taking a snapshot at some point in the game. Now, it's later in the game. It's later in the season. Oklahoma went on to lose their next couple of games.
Century.
Right?
Yeah.
So you could be wrong about the fundamentals. You could be wrong about the fundamentals in Ohio. You could be reading Ohio as an R+8 state when, in fact, it's a Trump +8 state, but people like Sherrod Brown win.
Yes.
So if you get the fundamentals wrong, and Tim Ryan is ahead and is later in the game than you think, Tim Ryan could win.
Right. Plus, there's the any given Sunday factor.
It's a great analogy. That's correct. Any given election, they could pull it off. They could lose the next 8 elections. It doesn't mean that Ohio turned blue, but you could pull off an individual election like Doug Jones did.
Right. Or you could say they hired a new coach in Nebraska and he's got lots of college experience. And you think, oh, they have a better shot. And then you find out the coach is Jim Jordan and, it all goes to hell.
Yeah. So the point there is if Oklahoma goes on to lose a couple of games, that's like misinterpreting the fundamentals. Or as we say in New York City, I got your fundamentals right here, followed by a very rude gesture you can't show on the internet.
Yeah. Even if it was video, we'd probably pixelate it.
Here's another example.
Yes.
CBS News poll we were talking about, right?
All right.
They were looking at the governor there, and they were looking at the governor and senator in Wisconsin.
Right.
Same CBS News poll. Likely voters for president.
Oh, no. All right.
It's not a presidential year.
Well, I mean, that's very unlikely this year.
Right. But if the election were held today and you had the choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in Michigan, you want to guess the results?
51-49.
52-46 Biden.
Okay. It's close. Okay,
Right?
good.
Nevada, likely voters.
Yes.
Biden, 52, Trump, 46.
All right.
Iowa, likely voters.
Cows included.
Biden, 49, Trump, 49.
Ah,
If you're going to talk to
okay.
me about fundamentals and make a big point about how Biden's unpopular, I got your fundamentals right here.
Okay. I mean, that's true. You don't have to be popular to win. I mean,
Right,
it helps.
you just have to be more popular than the other guy. You know the old joke.
Yes. Which
You and a buddy, run into a bear. You don't have to be faster than the bear. You have to be faster than your buddy.
Right. Which, it's Fat Bear Week. Maybe you're
Yeah,
both faster.
exactly.
Maybe he catches your buddy and
And
says,
he's
I
even
want
fatter.
extra protein.
Exactly.
I'm gonna come for you, too.
The point is you're running against somebody else. You're not running against a mythical person who's perfect.
Yes.
Right? And so, you're going to have a binary on the ballot. It's going to be Vance or Ryan. Mm-hmm. Well, Biden's really unpopular. Yeah, but he's probably better in terms of his vote getting potential than his popularity, his job approval,
All right. Now,
which are different things.
in this era of advocating for the non-binary, it doesn't really help because there's really only, generally speaking, 2 people on the ballot at any
Yeah,
given
not
time
unless
that will
Ralph
have a
Nader's
chance.
voting. And by the way, Nader says, forget about everything I said for the past 30 years. Just vote for the goddamn Democrat because the Republicans are a bunch of fascists.
All right.
All right? Now, it's 22 years too late, but at least he got there.
He's
Talk about unsafe
time
at
to
any
think
speed.
about it.
Nader is slow, but, he got there.
We're just being cautious. And then some states have ranked choice voting, and you can play around with an extra candidate or 2.
I mean, I'll never forgive him for 2000, so don't even go there with
All
me.
right.
But,
well,
I'll take it this year.
okay. Good. He didn't lose his mind. There are people who are completely gone over this. But okay. Good. It's good to hear that news. I don't know who's still, taking voting advice from him, but somebody must be.
Anyway, so I thought that it was an interesting
Yeah.
approach. If you don't understand polls, maybe you understand football. If you don't understand polls or football, then we'll have to think about it in terms of food.
Oh. Do you
I
have
haven't come
something
up with
prepared
anything,
for? Oh, okay,
but,
you're going to work on that.
I got to
All right.
find something that's of interest to you.
Yeah. Well, no, I get the idea. Certainly, and it makes sense. And I thought that was a good analogy. Most people will probably understand. You don't even have to be terribly interested in football just to know that, well, the games go on for a certain period of time.
Four
and,
quarters, so the score in the first quarter isn't the same as the score at the end of the game necessarily.
Right. And, every team
some
that
years it
plays
is.
in these leagues displays a certain level of competence. If you give them the ball first, there's a pretty good chance that they'll score something.
On the other hand,
and
like you
that
said,
doesn't
on
mean
any
much.
given Sunday, the
Right.
other team can win, even though they're 1-12 for the year.
Yeah.
But on that day, they were better than you.
Right. And even if
So
everybody's
if
there.
you bet against them and bet on your own team, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Somebody twists their ankle. They look the wrong direction.
Okay. Now here's a
got
story I haven't really read. I just
All
came
right.
across, but I have to give it to you because it's just so darn interesting.
Who needs reading? Let's
Long-term
just
listeners to the podcast
Yeah.
may know I'm a big fan of the old movie The Mouse That Roared with Peter Sellers.
Right. Okay. That's true. It's been a while.
Okay. So meet President Baugh, B-A-U-G-H, the self-proclaimed dictator of a micronation in Nevada you've probably never heard of.
In Nevada?
Yeah.
Huh.
He's
yeah,
a
I've definitely
benevolent
never heard of
dictator
this one.
of the Republic of Molossia, a 1-acre micronation in Nevada, as currency pegged to the value of cookie dough, and a navy consisting of 2 kayaks.
All right.
It's a self-proclaimed independent state whose sovereignty is not recognized by the international community.
Well, that's a problem for him.
Right? And, the thing is, he's when he was 15 years old, he was just this huge fan of The Mouse That Roared,
Okay.
a satirical 1959 movie about a tiny fictional nation waging war in the U.S. The idea was for them to lose, and so the U.S. would then feel like they have to support them.
Yeah, back in the Marshall
But in
Plan
fact,
days.
they won.
Okay, right. It
So
was a
he's
big
now the
mistake. Any
benevolent
given
dictator
Sunday.
of the Republic of Molossia.
All right.
And that's where he got the idea. I just thought that
good.
was pretty interesting because these are the kind of people that turn out to be, odd.
Yes.
And some of them wind up, running and winning Senate.
Oh, well, yeah. I don't think that's. He's not trying that yet.
Not yet is the operative concept here.
But I guess he might. Maybe he's watching the Pennsylvania race closely and thinking if Oz can vote in Turkey and run for Senate and win, if he wins, then maybe I can be the president or benevolent dictator of Molossia and also run for Senate. It's possible.
Right. So this story is in Business Insider, now known as Insider. It all started in 1977 when a 15-year-old Kevin Baugh and his childhood best friend James Spielman watched The Mouse That Roared. I was struck by the imagination and creativity of that, said the 60-year-old who asked to be referred to as Your Excellency during a phone interview with Insider.
I'm going to do that.
4 decades on, he's lost contact with that friend, but the dream of ruling his own miniature country lives on.
Lost contact. That guy's buried. There's a coup in Molossia.
Yeah. It was originally known as the Grand Republic of Voldstein. Baugh appointed himself prime minister, and Spielman was made king.
Oh.
Now, he conceded it was a little more than childish reverie. It was fictional, I guess you could say, but eventually, he did it. At least he says he did.
What is
It's
it?
self-proclaimed, so you can do anything you want.
Right. I guess so. He's bought himself a uniform, I see.
Yeah.
And with a big hat. Sunglasses, that's good. You got to have that if you're going to be a dictator.
Yeah. And very reminiscent of early Woody Allen movies.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's somewhere
Latin
between
American...
Bananas
right.
and
it's a little Gaddafi-ish as well.
and the movie where he bought an old detective movie, James Bond style movie from Hong Kong, and put his own words on it. What's up, Tiger Lily?
Oh yeah, okay.
Right, where there are countries that are just waiting their turn, but they're all in boxes. They're waiting for a spot to open up on the map.
Okay.
So he looks like one of the guys in one of those movies. And it's really a very odd story, but, hey, 10 years ago you'd say, well, this is just, get him some help. And these days, whereas in those days you probably meant some mental health services, these days what you mean is some Republican consultants and some money.
Maybe. Yeah, it's difficult to know which way
Get
he
me
leans
Roger Stone.
so far. I mean, I guess maybe it reveals itself in the article. You could figure out which direction he leans, but yeah, okay. I mean, it's a hobby. It's a thing you could do with your spare time.
Yeah. Well, I'm all for things like that don't hurt anybody.
Yeah, as long as he doesn't.
But, when it comes to paying your taxes, don't get into an argument because...
Yeah, no word. Is there anything in there about that?
That's how the Bundys got into trouble.
Yeah. I mean, it might be that he doesn't, that he just has fun dressing up, but also pays his taxes.
Yeah, I don't know. Also, I don't know what his searches have been for security equipment.
Right, true, and that tells you everything, that you need to know about the United States. By the way, I guess there's a lot of people apparently afraid of pornography out there as well, as it turns out, according to the search engine data.
Oh, I guess.
I mean, I guess it must be fear of something, right? I don't know exactly what. Defunding, I don't know what. But people are out there searching, doing their research to find out what would happen if I don't know.
That they are. And so the last piece before the end of the hour, some Axios.
All right.
And I wonder if this is a Josh Crash Hour piece. I can't tell.
Is it bad?
One big thing, starving weak candidates. With 30 days until the midterms, party leaders are making ruthless calculations to cut funding for underachieving candidates in a push to capitalize on their top targets, like pulling money out of New Hampshire because Don Bolduc, Captain America meets Braveheart, isn't doing well against Maggie Hassan.
Okay. Right.
Why it matters, we're seeing Democrats cut funding for House candidates because they don't have enough money. For the expanding battleground map. Why is it expanding? Because Democrats are supposed to lose in a wave, and it turns out they're not losing in a wave, and nobody knows who's going to win. And so there's places like my own, Connecticut 5, where Johanna Hayes is holding her own against George Logan, the Republican. Places like New Jersey 7, where Tom Malinowski's running against Tom Keene Jr. It's a newly formed district, and it's supposed to be pro-Republican, but it's neck and neck, and so you got to have enough money to pay for that sort of thing. Virginia 2, where Elaine Luria is running against Jen Kagan, I think is her name.
Well, maybe. Let's say
places like that. And so Rhode Island 2, where Alan Fung, the Republican mayor of Cranston, is doing fairly well against a Democratic incumbent. And so you want to be able to spend a lot of money there because it's a pick-em, district. So that's instead of spending money to people who are going to lose against Marjorie Taylor Greene, my advice is send money to these people.
Yes. Okay. I mean, I guess so.
It doesn't mean you have to defund the Marjorie Taylor Greene candidate. You can just send to both.
Yeah, I mean, you could just keep things in mind that some of the less prominent races there's a real seat there, and it has a real vote.
Well, not just that. Money can make a big difference. Yeah. Money's not going to make a difference in the Marjorie Taylor Greene at this point because her opponent is really well funded.
Yeah. Well, that's true, and I haven't focused on that race for a long time, usually because the early part of the primaries of those races are 17 different candidates saying, I'm the one running to unseat her, and then I have to wait.
So Democrats can win, Democrats can lose, we don't know, but if you got extra money, send it to the races where it's 50-50, and your bucks might go for a way, small amount of money can go a big way.
Okay, understood. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Now what? I don't know. I'm a little bit intrigued by the fake dictator guy, and I would like to find out whether or not is he like a tax protester or is he just having fun over here? And where did he get that uniform? It's maybe sort of an olive drab suit jacket thing that he got, maybe a knockoff of a Masters blazer. I don't know. It's not quite that color. It's the right color, and then he's got a bunch of medals on, which I assume are fake-ish medals, and got himself a sash and everything. So he looks very Latin American / Northern African, perhaps, dictator of the 70s and 80s. All the stereotypes we're used to. And it does say he's benevolent, so there is that. Let's see what he's got going on here. Right, he had his friend. They watched The Mouse That Roared. They decided to do this thing. But what have they actually done here? I'm a little bit curious about that. The micronation was born at a suburban house in Portland, Oregon in 1977, so it's moved. It's now in Nevada, so that's interesting too. And I guess if you're a micronation, that's one of the advantages. You can pick it up and put it in a truck and move it somewhere else. So, let's see. Spielman, the king, eventually abandoned the project, but Bao continued working on it sporadically while he served in the U.S. Army. You'll have less time when you're serving in the Army to do things like that. He left the Army in the 1990s, settled in Nevada with his family. Around this time, he said he started taking the micronation more seriously, now that he was no longer serving this nation. The internet came along, and I was able to see that other people had created their own country. So crazy people were able to talk to one another. That's cool. So I took Molossia from being just on paper to having our own website. So from paper to less than paper, not even paper, but somehow that's a growth. Very, financial markety of you. Baugh continued researching micronations online, finding information on how he could fully realize one of his own, and he never did. I guess he just talks about it a lot to Business Insider, which again is now Insider, which means it's no longer any of your business, I guess. A micronation is a self-proclaimed independent state. like a real thing, you would describe it this way: a self-proclaimed independent state whose sovereignty is not recognized. Oh, I didn't realize that, because there are some very small micro nations that are recognized, but okay, not recognized by the international community. For example, world governments and the UN do not recognize them as legitimate. They're often small, the outgrowth of a single individual, and viewed as trivial enough to be ignored by the established nation their land sits within. The U.S. knows Molossia exists, Baugh said, but, quote, basically ignores it. And I'm not entirely convinced that they know it exists. But if he wasn't paying his taxes and was filing forms that say, I don't have to pay taxes because I live in the sovereign nation of Molossia, then somebody knows. I'm just trying to figure out if that's what he's doing. There are at least 67 separate micronations in the world, Insider previously reported. They're the world's foremost authority on the world's lastmost nations. Paul learned that micronations are usually formed by claiming the land they live on as their own territory. So, that makes sense. In 1998, he bought a small plot in Nevada and claimed it as the homeland for our country, which was then called the Kingdom of Molossia. For a short period afterward, it was ruled as a communist dictatorship. How interesting. Baugh said the communist iconography the micronation used riled up locals, so he decided to turn Molossia into a capitalist military dictatorship. Which is interesting because he's listening to the voice of the people, but not his people, the voice of the neighbors. And that just goes to show that once again, the America-backed coup in Molossia overthrew the popularly elected or popularly supported communist dictatorship. Once again, the United States nefarious actor in all of this. Unbelievable. For a short period afterward, it was, we got that. Then he changed over, and Baugh has made himself the self-proclaimed benevolent dictator of what is now called the Republic of Molossia. Not the kind of dictator that makes people disappear in the night or anything like that. There are no people, of course, for him to disappear. So it's not that it wouldn't be something he would do. It's just that there aren't any people to disappear anyway, I think. But anyway, he goes on to say, we're a family nation. That would really irritate the family if someone just suddenly disappears. I guess his family are residents of Molossia as well. Okay. There are 35 citizens, he says, all of whom are related to Baugh, and all of whom, I guess, live in exile from Molossia. But this number, he said, also includes the family's 3 dogs. The human citizens all have dual citizenship, quote unquote, with the United States. Not necessarily so for the dogs, doesn't say. It still helps to have that U.S. citizenship, Baugh said. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to go to Walmart or something like that, and we'd all starve to death. He's very practical-minded. Citizens vote in U.S. elections and pay U.S. taxes. There's the answer, which Baugh jokingly refers to as foreign aid. That's funny. Baugh said Molossians have very positive relations with local communities over the border. They make regular appearances in the nearby town of Dayton, Nevada, and participate in the annual Nevada Day Parade in Carson City. He's there in his uniform and everything, waving at people. It's a novelty. Baugh said he has relative freedom to do what he wants in Molossia, but is always eager to avoid introducing laws that would contravene American law or otherwise aggravate U.S. authorities. I can pass whatever laws I want as long as I don't offend the bigger country around me because you don't want to make them mad, he said. And that's good political science, quite honestly. You can have your own money, your own stamps, your own whatever, customs, holidays, things like that, so it's really fun. Molossia has its own currency, you remember. That it's pegged, right? The Valora is what they call it. Unusually, it says, although really the fact is that this is usual practice for them, but the practice itself is unusual. It's pegged to the relative value of chocolate chip cookie dough, which is difficult to determine. That's really kind of pegged to the dollar too. I guess you had to go to the supermarket and figure out which brand, and who knows, maybe it's what do they say? A basket of different cookie doughs, perhaps, to add some stability to it. We like doing things a little differently here in our own country, Baugh said. We also have our own measurement system and time zone, stuff like that. The time zone is 39 minutes ahead of Pacific Standard Time and 21 minutes behind Mountain Standard Time. using the unique and nonsensical Kokintz system, Kokintz, measurements based lengths on the size of Baugh's hand and volume relative to the size of Diet Pepsi cans. Why not? Molossia also has a navy, despite being landlocked. Our entire navy is composed of inflatable kayaks, Baugh said, adding that there are often training exercises at Lake Tahoe. Baugh said the country is currently at war with East Germany, which ceased to exist in 1990 and was once in battle with another micronation, Mustachistan. They were once in battle with Mustachistan. A micronational war is just somebody spamming your email inbox or something like that, he explained. The economy is tourism-based. Approximately 200 people visit Molossia a year. Tourists get their passports stamped upon arrival and are free to explore the sights of the tiny country. It takes about an hour and a half to literally see every site, or to see literally every site. Baugh leads the tours himself, but also works a full-time job. He declined to comment on his profession because it would take the sense of humor out of things. Baugh conceded that running Molossia is a bit of fun and a chuckle, but said that at its core, it is a serious exploration of what constitutes a nation and what a world of micronations would look like. We're dependent on the U.S. for almost everything economically, food and clothes and all that kind of stuff that you would normally buy, Baugh said. But within those limits, we take our nation pretty seriously and at the same time have a good time with it. So, it's interesting. It's worth thinking about. I mean, not actually worth doing. I mean, it was worth exploring exactly how crazy he was. So now we know he's not likely to show up as a lunatic Republican candidate for Senate anytime soon. He's not like that. I mean, you never know how things develop as you age, but okay. Glad to know that that's the case. Now back to more relevant topics for our current situation here in the macro nation of the United States of America. Over the weekend, let's see, former guy developments over the weekend were interesting. The New York Times reporting, thanks to the people we don't like to talk about a great deal, Maggie Haberman and Michael Schmidt, take it with a grain of salt if you want. Look at this. The picture that is illustrating the story is, where is this one from? One of the Trump rallies. This one in Warren, Michigan. Is that the one that happened I guess it couldn't have happened over the weekend because this is from an October 8th story. But he had another rally recently over the weekend. I guess is what he's doing with his weekends these days. This one features somebody dressed up, I guess, as the Statue of Liberty. They have one of those novelty Statue of Liberty foam hat crown things on, but and then a green dress of some kind, and they look pretty goofy. But they're just one of several people in the crowd who all look relatively goofy, quite honestly. But there they are, looking bored, and that's one of the chief features I've noticed of the rallies is the crowds don't get all that riled up. Certainly, they're not very excited to hear anybody speak, including Trump, quite honestly. Very often they kind of sleepwalk through his speeches. But then the rest of the people who get time on stage are actually considerably less popular and less interesting with the crowd. And though there have been a lot of segments, a lot of film clips of Murdery Trader Green lately, because she found something that's getting her an extremely getting her a lot more attention than usual, which is she now goes around saying variants of that line that got noticed the other day, that Democrats are killing Republicans already and they need to do something about it. So she repeats that line in various forms and gets a lot more attention for it. But I noticed that yesterday's clip that was circulating of her saying that there was almost zero crowd reaction. They're very bored by most of what gets said at these rallies, and they're very sparsely attended as well, though, they do still succeed in getting the press to run pictures of the few attendees packed together in one small, tight space so that it looks like the place is crowded. And they oblige by running those photos. Anyway, Maggie Haberman and Michael Schmidt have this story. The headline is, How Trump Deflected Demands for Documents enmeshing aides. That sounds like there's nothing new to it. If you want the long story made short, a good idea is to look instead to Tom Sullivan over at Digby's Hullabaloo, whose headline is more to the point. Trump held documents hostage? ? He wanted to cut a deal for Russia investigation records. That's the basic essence of what's going on. We'll read through, though, the entirety of the New York Times article, but I wanted to give Tom some credit for having distilled out the essence of why people are interested in this story. It seems that at some point, while people are still trying to answer the question of what other reasons might there be for Trump to have kept these documents, people have had all sorts of guesses, but an additional guess now is he was holding them hostage, saying there are Russia investigation documents that I want to have in my possession from the FBI that the FBI didn't get, or what, are they're not giving them to me now because I'm not president. And when I was president, I tried at the last minute to get a hold of those things because I'm lazy and I'm stupid and I forgot about the lie that I'd been telling the whole time about how the Russia investigation was a hoax and I could prove it with the documents. And then on January 19th, I made some demands for documents and the FBI was like, no, they're kind of classified. We have to redact them and stuff like that before we give them to you. And then time ran out because he's a very dumb and lazy person and totally disorganized. So anyway, the full story has some other details about some other angles on this too. How Trump deflected demands for documents enmeshing aides. The subheader reads, the former president exhibited a pattern of dissembling, that's lying, about the material he took from the White House, creating legal risk not just for himself but also some of his lawyers. That brings us back to the story of the lawyers signing documents saying, yeah, we gave you everything, when in fact they have not, or had not, and probably still have not. And by the way, just to put a finer point on that issue that we discussed briefly with Greg, right, I think probably everybody now understands it, but in case either you were late to the show or you didn't get exactly what we're talking about, or I used some of the same words and made things confusing, right, why do we not raid Mar-a-Lago again, for one thing, Trump Tower, Bedminster, other locations, if you're one of the people who believes that he hid something in Ivana Trump's coffin at Bedminster, why not that too? At this point, put nothing past him. There's nothing more crazy than anything else. I'm sorry. That's, it's entirely possible, but why not search? And the answer again is, well, we've said you have to have probable cause, and you need to be able to demonstrate it with particularity to a judge, and not ask for a generalized warrant like, well, we found some things the last time we searched, so why can't we just search all of his properties? And, on the one hand, people say, okay, I understand how warrants work, so you can't just do it like that. But what do you need for a warrant? You need probable cause. And if you ask yourself, do you think, as a normal thinking adult person, that there probably are more documents, some hidden, some not, all over Trump properties, wherever they may be, those properties, that is? The answer is, yeah, you would have to say yes, probably. So isn't that probable cause? Well, you left out the cause part, right? It is probable that there are more documents. But you need probable cause to believe that that exactly where they are, and not giving warrants for a generalized search, or that is the cause part, right? If you have more information, I have probable cause to believe that they're in that desk. Well, what's the cause part? It's probable that they're in the desk, but what's causing you to say that they're in the desk? If all it is, well, he had papers in another desk, that's not really going to be it. What's the cause? So if I'm caused to believe that probably those papers are in the desk, that's probably because you heard from somebody, yeah, I've seen him store similar documents in his desk at Trump Tower or Bedminster or something like that. And not just, well, he's had access to those properties since we found out that he's been hiding papers. That's probably not enough cause to believe that they're there now. But if you say, I saw them and I saw them last week, or I saw them and he said to me, I always keep these here, or something like that. If you have some more evidence that would establish that if you searched this place in this property, you can sometimes get a more generalized warrant when the evidence is that the stuff is dispersed throughout the property and it's in every drawer, and you have evidence that says he splits that evidence up and puts these documents in every drawer in every house for whatever reason, as opposed to keeping them in one place or another. So, but again, you have to convince a magistrate judge that you have maximum probability of coming up with what you're looking for with a minimum of invasion. That's essentially what we're trying to do here. And I mean, even when they searched Mar-a-Lago, they asked for, we want to look in the storage room, it's in the basement. We want to look in the 45 office. To some extent, we're going to have to. We have evidence that says we would do well to look in the residence. That's possible too. But it doesn't mean, who knows where it is. Maybe it's behind the walls in the guest rooms. We want to tear the paneling off the walls in there. I imagine they still have paneling in those rooms. No, unless you have some better evidence about that, I'm not going to allow that. Well, we want to tear the dining room apart. Or we think that it's underneath the foundation to the pool, and we want to wreck the place, so we're going to tear the pool apart. No. You have to have some real evidence. And that's why we're not just generally tearing apart all the Trump properties as much as we'd like to. And as much as I believe we would find incriminating evidence there, you got to know, you have to have some better basis for it than just that it's probable, is what I'm saying. Well, it's pretty likely he's hiding something. Or you might even think it's related to the case. But you got to show why you think so. And that's the hurdle. Anyway, so where were we? We were just beginning this thing. Late last year, as the National Archives ratcheted up the pressure on former President Donald J. Trump to return boxes of records he had taken from the White House to his Mar-a-Lago club, he came up with an idea to resolve the looming shutdown, cut a deal. Mr. Trump, still determined to show he had been wronged by the FBI investigation into his 2016 campaign's ties to Russia, which he wasn't, was angry with the National Archives and Records Administration for its unwillingness to hand over a batch of sensitive documents that he thought proved his claims. In exchange for those documents, Mr. Trump told advertisers, probably advertisers as well, but advisors is really what he was telling advisors, but maybe advertisers. He would return to the National Archives the boxes of material he had taken from to Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, and make a hostage trade there. That's interesting too. And by the way, there's a bit of an analog running in both directions here, right? Why doesn't he? Why? Well, you might ask, why, while he was president, did he not demand these documents? And apparently, there's some evidence that he did demand those documents, and that the FBI was loath to turn them over to him unredacted because they were a little worried about where that stuff would end up. And also, there's a process for these things, and he wasn't likely to follow them. You know how he is about paperwork. As it turns out, there was all sorts of mess about this. And a related article here about how, once again, he claimed to be declassifying documents. When he did get a hold of some of these Russia documents, he claimed to be declassifying them and then shared them at some point with John Solomon, the now thoroughly discredited, not so much journalist, for a while writing for The Hill and a number of other outlets, and who later was named as his custodian of records and his liaison to the National Archives and Records Administration. But he wanted to show John Solomon these documents that he said exonerated him, or at least pinned on the FBI that they were totally framing him in the hoax of the Russia investigation. And he claimed to be declassifying them. And he apparently even signed some sort of order that would declassify this. So there's some actual paper evidence, but then they forgot that, well, there's a whole process for actually declassifying these things. this signature is a request or perhaps even a demand that the agency with an interest in keeping these things classified conduct a review and see about how they can make some sort of public release if there's enough redaction that they can do, or they can object to the declassification. There's a whole process, and he was ignoring all of that because he heard somewhere on Fox News or something that all he had to do was think that they were declassified, and that should be enough. Anyway, we'll get to that perhaps later on. So where were we? He wanted to get these records from the National Archives, and for some reason they were slow in handing them over to him. Maybe because he wasn't president anymore when he made this demand. Mr. Trump's aides never pursued the idea of this exchange, but the episode is one in a series that demonstrates how Mr. Trump spent a year and a half deflecting, delaying, and sometimes leading aides to dissemble when it came to demands from the National Archives and ultimately the Justice Department to return the material that he had taken. Interviews and documents show that pattern was strikingly familiar to how Mr. Trump confronted inquiries into his conduct while in office. Entertain or promote outlandish ideas, eschew the advice of lawyers and mislead them, then push lawyers and aides to impede investigators. That is how he governed. It's true. In the process, some of his lawyers have increased their own legal exposure and had to hire lawyers themselves. And Mr. Trump has ended up in the middle of an investigation into his handling of the documents that has led the Justice Department to seek evidence of obstruction. That path began well before Mr. Trump left office. Concerns about Mr. Trump's habit of bringing documents to his White House bedroom began not long after he took office. By the second year of his administration, tracking the material he had in the residence had become a familiar obstacle, according to people familiar with his practices. And by the third year, there were specific documents that West Wing officials knew were not where they should be. While in office, we knew this, or they knew this anyway. In the closing weeks of his presidency, the White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, as we know him on the show, Pat Cipollone, flagged the need for Mr. Trump to return documents that had piled up in boxes in the White House residence, according to archives officials. It is also our understanding that roughly 24 boxes of original presidential records were kept in the residence of the White House over the course of President Trump's last year in office and have not been transferred to NARA, despite a determination by Pat Cipollone in the final days of the administration that they need to be. Gary M. Stern, you remember him from last week, the top lawyer for the National Archives, told Mr. Trump's representatives in a 2021 letter using an abbreviation for the agency's name. Mr. Stern added that he had raised concerns about the issue with another top White House lawyer in the final weeks of the administration. Stern acknowledged to Trump's representatives the complications that had come with the abrupt end of Trump's term. We know things were very chaotic, as they always are in the course of a one-term transition. That is why the transfer of the Trump electronic records is still ongoing and won't be complete for several more months, but it is absolutely necessary that we obtain and account for all original presidential records. Throughout 2021, Stern doggedly pressed Trump's representatives to have him hand over the boxes. Stern went back and forth about the issue with people Trump had originally designated to represent him in dealing with the archives, among them Mark Meadows, the former White House chief of staff, and 3 lawyers who had worked in the White House counsel's office. In September of 2021, as Mr. Stern increased the pressure on Trump to return the boxes, Trump told Meadows that there were about a dozen boxes he had taken from the White House, but that they only contained newspaper clippings and personal effects. According to 3 people briefed on the matter, to some aides, Trump claimed that the contents of the boxes included dirty laundry. Meadows shared Trump's characterizations of the contents of the boxes with Patrick Philbin, another of Trump's representatives to the archives and a former White House lawyer. Philbin in turn relayed the message, which months later would prove to be false, to Mr. Stern. You see what's happening here? But archives officials made clear that even newspaper clippings and printouts of articles seen by Mr. Trump in office were considered presidential records. He thought that was like a safe excuse. So you won't be interested in those. They're not presidential records. They're just newspaper clippings. Well, as it turns out, in the complicated world of presidential record keeping, that is a presidential record. and you're just dumb and you don't really understand that, no matter how many times we explain it to you, and you're never going to get it. And so, I've played the 1 minute break thing here. So we'll see how this works out. I'm sure that'll screw up the music. Won't screw up the outro anyway. But anyway, they tried explaining that to Trump, and he just didn't want to hear it and didn't want to understand that there was no such thing as presidential papers that weren't also presidential records. And the excuse that he thought that was going to be perfect for dodging handing things over turned out to be really crappy.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Okay, well, we'll call it now. Well, welcome back to the show. And we had an extended break there as a result of our screwing things up, but I needed it in order to read up on some things and see where we might go next in our discussions. Okay, well, for now, we'll go back to the New York Times, the story of the games he's been playing with the documents. When we left off, we were just explaining that Trump either has difficulty understanding or just refuses to acknowledge that he's wrong about these things, or whatever game it is that he's playing, that he doesn't understand why, or claims not to understand why, things that don't look to him like they're presidential records, because it's just newspaper clippings, might be considered presidential records by the National Archives and Records Administration. And really, honestly, when you're trying to find out what would constitute a presidential record, should you ask a person who was once president but isn't president now, or someone who's in the business of keeping presidential records? And, president would be a good choice ordinarily, although even a competent president is probably a less authoritative on it than the agency charged with doing this stuff all the time for all presidents. Anyway, so once again, he found out that his simplistic understanding of things didn't really fly in the legal world. And what a surprise. And also that he's very crappy at paperwork. And I've been saying that for a long time too. Trump and paperwork, man. It'll get you in trouble every time. But where were we? Archives officials made clear that even newspaper clippings and printouts of articles seen by Trump in office were considered presidential records. The archives often found personal effects among the materials presidents turned in, and the archives would send them back to Trump if they ever found any. Still, Trump returned no boxes. By the fall, Stern was growing increasingly frustrated and dealing with Alex Cannon, a lawyer who had worked for the Trump Organization and the 2020 campaign, and then Mr. Trump's Political Action Committee. Cannon had also been involved in responding to requests for documents from the Congressional Committee investigating the January 6th attack. In a conversation in late October or early November of last year, Stern told Cannon that he had tried other avenues for retrieving the documents and failed. He acknowledged that the Presidential Records Act did not contain an enforcement mechanism, and that's an important thing that's missing, but suggested that the archives had options, including the ability to ask the Attorney General to assist in retrieving the documents, according to people briefed on the discussions. Cannon told Stern that the documents would be returned by the end of the year, the people said. Around that time, Mr. Cannon, who told others that he worried the boxes might contain documents that were being sought in the January 6th inquiry, called Mr. Trump, who insisted the boxes contained nothing of consequence. Nonetheless, Cannon told associates that the boxes needed to be shipped back as they were, so the professional archivists could be the one to sift through the material and set aside what they believed belonged to Mr. Trump. What is more, Cannon believed that there was the possibility that the boxes could contain classified material, according to two people briefed on the discussions, and none of the staff members in Mr. Trump's presidential office at Mar-a-Lago had proper security clearances. It was around that same time that Trump floated the idea of offering the deal to return the boxes in exchange for documents he believed would expose the Russia investigation as a hoax cooked up by the FBI. Mr. Trump did not appear to know specifically what he thought the archives had, only that there were items he wanted. So here is a number of interesting issues wrapped up in this. One, of course, is, well, the documents that you seek are more likely to be either presidential records or FBI official records to which you would have no access now that you are out of office. You had 4 years to get a hold of them as president and would have had relatively unlimited power in doing so, but you were lazy and or forgot to do it. And you can't get it now that you're not president because you aren't entitled to these documents. And no, you can't work around it by saying, well, I'll trade you my hostage for those things, because you don't have, you're not entitled to that. And there will be instead a hostage rescue effort. Instead, you don't have the right to hold on to that hostage. And just like a hostage situation, they won't let you keep the hostage. At any rate, plus, of course, the other issue that's wrapped up in this is, okay, let's say probable cause is a two-way street here. And, there's no real reason to believe that it applies equally in both directions. But just as we can't just generally raid all the Trump properties thinking, well, it's probable, anyway, that there are more documents and that we will turn them up by raiding all of his properties very thoroughly and looking everywhere where he might have hidden documents and other records. But he, of course, is seeking something from the FBI. What is it he's looking for? If he were executing a search warrant against them, he would have to say with particularity what he was looking for and why he believed that they were, that those documents were in certain places, and name the places that he wanted to search for them. And I don't think you get very far with a generalized accusation that the FBI has some documents that will show it's all a hoax. Which documents are they? I can't even say that. Where are the documents? I don't know. What are the documents? I don't know. What do they say? I'm not sure. I'll tell you when I get them. That won't get you any sort of search warrant. And so, well, it's not what he was looking for. Of course, he was looking for this weird extra legal remedy of I'll trade you national security secrets for your secrets. And guess what? Although he does believe that we've got to make great deals, he was unable to make that deal. It's weird. Anyway, Mr. Trump's aides, recognizing that such a swap would be a non-starter since the government had a clear right to the material Mr. Trump had taken from the White House and the Russia-related documents held by the archives remained marked as classified, never acted on the idea. Now, they may have told Trump, yeah, we'll take care of it. Or they may have said, that's stupid. They may have said nothing. I don't know. But Trump was probably under the impression that they thought it was awesome and they were going to do it. A spokesman for Mr. Trump did not respond to a request for comment. A representative for the archives didn't respond to a request for comment. Neither did Cannon. By the end of the year, a former advisor to Trump in the White House, a lawyer named Eric Hirschman, warned him that he could face serious legal ramifications if he did not return government materials he had taken with him when he left office. Turns out to be right. Mr. Hirschman told Trump that the consequences could be greater if some of the documents were classified. That turned out to be right, too. Oh, well, I don't know. Maybe actually it turned out to be wrong. He's certainly facing a lot of potential threats of these things, but still very much an open question whether, in fact, he will face any legal jeopardy in any of this stuff. He should, by all rights. And remember, what Hirschman is doing here is, I'm reading you the statute. It does say that you should be getting charged with this stuff. And it wouldn't be very wise of him as a lawyer to advise him. But, you're Donald Trump and you're a former president, and we could probably, when push comes to shove, if you later say, well, we might be able to argue that, a higher bar had to be cleared in order to allow for a search warrant or something like that, as they're now arguing. And maybe it'll work because you are an ex-president, and although you're not supposed to be above the law, you really kind of are. So let's make that argument and see how it goes, because that's where we are now. But it was good legal advice to say, well, why don't you just avoid the whole fight entirely? Because really, honestly, you're not entitled to this stuff, generally speaking. And what are you going to do with it? What are you ever going to do with anything? Suppose we gave you all the evidence in the world. You wouldn't be able to make a case about it because you're an inarticulate boob, and there's just no way you're going to convince people who don't already believe it. But, you don't say that and think you're going to get paid, right? Anyway. Finally, after telling advisors repeatedly that the boxes were, quote, mine, Mr. Trump consented to go through them, which his associates said he did in December. Stern was alerted that the boxes were ready for retrieval, but neither Trump nor any of his representatives informed Stern that they contained classified information. So, in January, the agency arranged for a contractor with a truck to go to Mar-a-Lago to pick up the boxes, which totaled 15, 3 more than the agency thought Mr. Trump had taken from the White House, and drive them to the Washington area. That was the initial exchange, subject to a, that one was, I don't think even they needed the subpoena, but that was the January thing where the archive said, come on, we know you have boxes. Oh, all right. And he gave them. And he lied about the number of boxes. He lied about what was in them. The whole works. Not knowing that the boxes contained classified information, agency personnel began opening the boxes in a room that did not meet government standards for handling secret materials. When they realized the sensitivity of the material, they quickly moved the boxes to specially secured areas where their contents could be more closely examined. Expect Trump at some point to say, even the supposed experts didn't follow the procedures. And then they say, I didn't follow the procedures. And you can understand that, right? I mean, if even the experts didn't even know. Yeah, but that doesn't work that way because, of course, they didn't know the contents of the boxes, and you did. Although you could say, well, I'm very stupid, and I didn't know what I packed. I'm a very dumb person. Could be an excuse, could be accepted as an excuse, might not be. But, yeah, I think you would guess that juries would hold the archivists blameless if they were told, yes, this is presidential records material, but not sensitive or confidential even or classified information. So, it would be okay to open things up and take a look at what's in there. Oh, my mistake. It is classified. What do? You close the boxes, move it to a facility where you're allowed to open boxes of classified materials. What other solution could there possibly be? Well, anyway, when they realized the sensitivity of the material, they quickly moved the boxes to specially secured areas where their contents could be more closely examined. Shortly thereafter, the National Archives alerted the Justice Department that classified materials may have been mishandled, leading federal authorities to open an investigation. This all makes good logical sense, but of course, in Trump world, this is all abuse of process. But now that you see how it went step by step, you were already convinced, but maybe some other people will become convinced now too. Around the time the archives retrieved the boxes, officials at the archives became skeptical. They had probable cause to become skeptical that Trump had returned everything and made clear they believed there was more in his possession. And there was, of course. Mr. Trump told Mr. Cannon last winter to tell the archivists that he had returned everything. Mr. Cannon, concerned about making such a definitive statement to federal officials, refused to do so. Their relationship ultimately became strained over the issue. You won't lie for me, so you're fired, right? Mr. Trump has told several advisors that he blames Mr. Cannon for the entire situation because the lawyer told him to give the records back, while informal advisors like Tom Fitton, who runs the conservative group Judicial Watch, but is not a lawyer, suggested Mr. Trump could claim the documents were personal records and hang on to them. No, you can't. Sorry. By the spring, A grand jury investigation had begun, and by June, the Justice Department was moving full steam ahead with the investigation, having issued a subpoena for any remaining classified material. In a face-to-face meeting at Mar-a-Lago on June 3rd between one of Mr. Trump's lawyers, Evan Corcoran, and a top Justice Department official overseeing the investigation, Jay Bratt, the lawyer returned another set of documents in response to the subpoena. Another Trump lawyer, Christina Bobb, then signed a statement on behalf of Mr. Trump saying that, quote, based upon the information that has been provided to me, unquote, all documents responsive to the subpoena were being returned after a, quote, diligent search. Yet 2 months later, during the August 8th search of Mar-a-Lago, because they had probable cause to believe with particularity that there was more information still being kept there, more papers still being kept by Trump, and they knew approximately where they were, and so they went and recovered them. 2 months later, during the August 8th search, the FBI found more than twice as many documents marked classified as had been turned over in June, including some in Mr. Trump's office. The FBI also found dozens of empty folders marked as having contained classified information. Among the crimes that the search warrant said the authorities might find evidence of was obstruction. Ms. Bobb has hired a criminal defense lawyer and signaled a willingness to answer questions from the Justice Department. In the aftermath of the search, investigators remained skeptical that they had retrieved all the documents. And in recent weeks, a top Justice Department official told Mr. Trump's lawyers that the department believed he still has not returned all the documents he took when he left the White House, according to people familiar with the discussions. And, of course, people familiar with Donald Trump and how he operates. I don't see how you could reach any other conclusion. So, let's see. There was also this piece that I mentioned earlier, which I guess comes originally from ABC News, which I think is where I got the John Solomon information from. On the last day of in office, Trump's last day in office, why? What is the reason? Why were sensitive documents allegedly in such disarray? It's a good question. We'll see if this actually answers it. The DOJ said it couldn't tell which documents were classified, is the subheader. Mike Levine and Catherine Faulders are the reporters on this piece. At the end of Donald Trump's presidency, his team returned a large batch of classified FBI documents and other government records to the Justice Department in such disarray that a year later, in a letter to lawmakers, the department said it still couldn't tell which of the documents were the classified ones. That's pretty bad. The documents came from the FBI's controversial probe of the 2016, looking at alleged links between Russia and Trump's presidential campaign. These are presumably among, anyway, the documents that Trump now says he wanted to trade what he had stolen from the White House for. So he had seen them and didn't take them, which is of some interest. I mean, usually you think he would have just stolen those things. But he once had them in his possession and still couldn't make any hay with them. So, that's something to note, too. The documents came from the FBI's controversial probe looking at links between Russia and his campaign. Trump tried to make the documents public the night before he left office, issuing a quote-unquote declassification memo, and secretly meeting with conservative writer John Solomon, who was allowed to review the documents. Solomon told ABC News this past week. Now keep an eye on that for just a second. But for reasons that are still not clear, and remember, this is a article that says, well, why are sensitive documents in such disarray? And it turns out the answer is, we don't know. The answers are still not clear. But anyway, we'll tell you about what happened. So you may never get a real answer, but they were in disarray, and this is how in disarray they were, how much in disarray they were. And why were they in disarray? Well, because he's really dumb and disorganized and lazy and a procrastinator is basically it. For reasons that are still not clear, and to the great frustration of Trump and his political allies, none of the documents were ever officially released, and the Justice Department said Thursday it's working to determine which documents can be disclosed. So mind you, He has a meeting with John Solomon. He grabs a bunch of FBI documents that he says will exonerate him in the Great Russia hoax. He signs something that purports to be a declassification memo. So it wasn't that he just thought about them being declassified. It wasn't that he declared them out loud to be declassified. He signed a document that he thought was going to do the trick. Now, where the document came from, I don't know. We'll see whether the article has anything about that. But it probably doesn't matter. The interesting part of it is that even though he signed a thing, nothing ever comes of it. There's a whole process for declassifying. This should stand as pretty good evidence that just thinking that something is declassified really won't actually do anything. Even signing something won't actually do something. There's other parts to the operation, and if nobody does them for whatever reason, then you don't have declassified documents. You got classified documents that you wish were declassified but aren't. And what will become of interest in all of this is he then goes and he shows these to John Solomon. So now what we're really talking about here is if those things aren't out and they're not declassified, then Donald Trump just leaked classified documents to John Solomon, and that's that. There's no other way around that. And John Solomon and Donald Trump both thought they were declassified, but they weren't. So what do you do with that? I don't know. I guess we'll find out as this thing plays out. So the Justice Department has failed to declassify a single page. Senators Charles Grassley of Iowa and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, of course, complained to the Attorney General in February. Okay, that's, they thought they were going to be declassified, but they weren't, and so they're concerned about the pace of declassification. And there might even be some gamesmanship going on here with the pace. But the point is, what they're saying is in February, those things were not declassified. But he had already showed them to John Solomon, so there you go. Something. Much of what happened with the documents in those last days of the Trump administration, and of course he would leave it to the last days, and ever since, remains shrouded in mystery because current and former government officials involved have refused to speak about it, especially now that the FBI is pursuing an investigation into Trump's alleged mishandling of a separate cache of classified documents. But of course, he left it to the last minute. And you can sort of understand why he did. And maybe that's supposed to be also evidence that he really did think he won re-election and had been stolen from him. But that just means he's as incompetent and stupid as you always thought that he was, because quite honestly, if you have a situation like that, what you do is you say, well, I believe I won, and I'm going to fight like hell to show that I did win. But in case something goes wrong, this is super important. We need to take care of this now. I need to declassify these documents and get them released. And it might even help my case if I could show why I believe it was stolen from me, this election. And part of the reason is because I think that there's a deep state conspiracy against me. If there's evidence out there that the deep state has been pursuing me, persecuting me, that would give motive to all this, then I should release it as soon as possible. Right away, actually years ago. But so I got caught up in the heat of the election. I thought I had 4 more years to do it, but, why would you play as though you did? Why not order that it be done sooner? And that's because he's stupid and disorganized and too dumb to be president. You get it? I can't say it any plainer than that. The story that still emerges, though, from pieces of public statements and Solomon's own accounts is one that sheds further light on how Trump's White House treated certain government secrets. And it helps explain how, in the midst of the FBI probe, Solomon became one of Trump's official, quote, representatives to the National Archives. This next section, entitled Thank God for Solomon, begins this way. By the middle of Trump's presidency, Solomon had become one of Trump's favorite voices in the media. John Solomon should get the Pulitzer Prize. He probably said Pulitzer. The Pulitzer Prize, Trump said to cheers at a rally in Louisiana in October 2019. Maybe he says Pulitzer because those are rich people. That's the name of a rich person, and I like to know the names of rich people because I like to pretend they like me. At the time, Solomon was promoting a series of since discredited claims about supposed Obama-era corruption in Ukraine. Now, there was no Obama era in Ukraine, of course, but while there was an Obama era here in the United States, other things were going on in Ukraine, and some of them may or may not have been corrupt. Why that rubs off on Obama or is supposed to, I don't know, but that's what he says. Claims which Trump then privately pushed the Ukrainian president to investigate, leading to Trump's first impeachment. And I guess here the connection is, well, okay, when Obama was president, well, of course, Joe Biden was vice president. And it was always their allegation that he was meddling in Ukrainian affairs, getting prosecutors in Ukraine who were thought to be corrupt elsewhere in the greater world community to be fired, and for good reason. But the Trump people think, oh, maybe he was trying to get them fired because one of the things he might have been investigating, although it turns out that he wasn't, was Burisma, and one of the people who was associated with Burisma was Hunter Biden, and so therefore something. That's the connection. Solomon's own employer then, The Hill newspaper, which we talk about all the time, eventually launched an internal review and concluded his Ukraine-related pieces, quote, potentially blurred the distinction between news and opinion, unquote, and at times failed to include relevant, quote, context and or disclosures. Solomon has stood by those pieces, insisting still that they were accurate. His work at the time was also focused on the FBI's Russia-related investigation and its offshoots, which he described as a, quote, sin against Donald Trump, which I didn't even know you could do, and an, quote, offense against the entire American people, and, quote, arguably the most devious political dirty trick in American history, unquote. Thank God we have John Solomon and several other Fox News hosts that he names here on our side, Trump declared at a 2019 rally. So, when Trump and his team were determined to push out the so-called full story of the Russia hoax before Trump's presidency ended, Solomon was well positioned to help with his online media platforms and regular TV appearances. We worked closely together in trying to get to the truth on that, Solomon recounted to Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, in an interview with him last year. In his final report on the investigation, the Justice Department's internal watchdog said that while it found fundamental errors and significant failures in the FBI probe, it found no evidence that, quote, political bias or improper motivation influenced the investigation, including the decision to eavesdrop on one of Trump's former campaign advisors. But Trump and many of his allies contend otherwise. Their continuing objection is described in the next section here. We'll see what we can get to before the show ends today. With just weeks left as president, all of a sudden, Trump, quote, demanded that key documents still classified by the FBI and Justice Department be brought to the White House so that they could be entered into the public record once and for all, Meadows wrote in his memoir published last year. On December 30th, 2020. The Justice Department delivered a binder filled with internal notes, memos, emails, and other records. The White House was unsure of what should be disclosed, so Trump's team asked a group of Republican staffers on the House Intelligence Committee to make recommendations. A congressional source informed of the request told ABC News. It's a foot and a half of documents, probably a foot and a half thick, I guess you're trying to say. Almost everything that the FBI had left out of public sight, Solomon said in an interview with a right-wing website on January 14th, 2021, predicting that the documents could be, quote, made public as early as tomorrow. Guess what? They have not yet been made public, and there must be a reason for that. The FBI objected to any release at all. Trump's declassification memo had said. The FBI has concerns about everything from the protection of assets and code names and prior investigations that may be referenced in the Russia materials to Privacy Act stuff, Solomon said in an interview with another right-wing website on January 18th, 2021. There's been a lot of back and forth. The FBI even sent a letter to the White House identifying passages and documents that were particularly crucial to keep from public disclosure, the subsequent memo said. Trump then agreed to some redactions, declaring that everything else in the binder was declassified, according to the memo. I personally went through every page to make sure that the president's declassification would not inadvertently disclose sources and methods, Meadows wrote in his book. But Meadows, of course, has no qualification to do that. It's unclear if the FBI and Justice Department ever agreed with the review Meadows conducted. Around that time, White House staffers produced multiple copies of documents from the binder, a former Trump administration official told ABC News. Well, the article goes on and on at some length here, but what is essentially happening here is once again proving the real world outcomes of thinking that things are declassified or declaring things to be unclassified is not the same thing as actually declassifying them. The government of the United States still considers these materials to be classified, yet they were disclosed at some point to John Solomon. He made zero hay out of all of that, even having seen them.
Networksradio.com.
That'll tell you the condition of the evidence for his stupid hoax theory.
In the morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, time to wrap things up, of course, for today. We'll be back tomorrow, and then we hit the road briefly as we return the boy to college for the remainder of the semester. Time now, though, for Justice Putnam to carry you through for the rest of the day. Stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next.